This conference will now be recorded.
Well, a few folks are trickling in, but I guess to honor everyone's time and to thank you for all who showed up right on time. Welcome everyone to what we think will be a really interesting story. And even if you're familiar with a little bit of the story, it's pretty exciting. My name is Risa Shimoda. I'm the executive director of the River Management Society, and welcome to our session called The Final Step: Looms for the Largest Ever Dam Removal. There was an AP story that hit a lot of newspapers around the country, and this project that you're going to hear about from one of the experts who've been working on it for a long time will probably be in the news for a couple of years. It is that big, that significant, and for many, many stakeholder groups that are both in the Northern California and Lower Oregon areas and the country. So thanks so much. If you could please mute yourself as you come in, that would be awesome. As we are recording this program for later on, and we'll make the recording available to folks. I think we can move forward. Take it,
Thanks,
Becca.
Lisa. Yep. Hey, everyone. My name's Becca Price, and I'm the communications coordinator for RMS. If you are not a member of RMS, or if you're not familiar with what we do, we are a national nonprofit organization that supports professionals who study, protect, and manage rivers. Throughout the year, we host a variety of workshops and collaboration opportunities, as well as connecting members through river trips and also through our listserv and directory. We host these river management roundtables twice monthly, and we welcome everyone who works on or for rivers. On the second Tuesday of the month, we cover on the water topics, which pertain to more technical aspects of river management. And then on the fourth Tuesday, we cover workplace culture topics, and these support diversity, equity, and inclusion work on your river. If there are topics that you'd like to suggest, or if you are interested in presenting, please let us know. We'll share just a couple of ground rules before we get started. We thank you all for being here, and just want to encourage you to respect everyone's opinions and perspectives on the topic. And please actively participate in the discussion. After Craig presents, we will have some time at the end for discussion, but you are welcome to drop questions and comments in the chat throughout. Risa is our executive director. Angie Furman is our River Training Center coordinator, and I'm the communications coordinator. And then Craig, if you would like to introduce yourself and take it away. I'll stop sharing my screen and let you also switch over to yours.
All right, let me see if I can pull this off. Share. All right. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'll make the screen big in a second for you. My name's Craig Tucker. I have spent most of the last 20 years working for the Karuk tribe, and I'll talk a little bit more about Karuk as we go. I started my own consulting business a couple of years ago, but Karuk remains my prime client, and I still represent the Karuk's interest on Klamath River dam removal. So I just want to we're really excited. We just had the draft environmental impact statement for dam removal released last week. We are really close to pulling off the biggest dam removal and salmon restoration project in U.S. history. But I want to just tell the story of how we got there, because one, it's a fun story to tell. Those of us who are river people, boaters, kayakers, um, it's like this idea that we can remove dams and free rivers is it's an intoxicating idea in a lot of ways. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk about how we got there and what all we did, and then what it means. And I think those of you who may be working on similar campaigns in other parts of the country, you might can there's some lessons learned and some pitfalls to avoid maybe in the Klamath story that you can take and put to work in your own watershed. And I think the way that'll work, we'll go through this. I'll try to hustle through this in about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll have a lot of time to just have discussion and questions. Does that sound right? Thumbs up from you, Becca? All right, so I think I want to do this. That's what I want to do. All right, bring the salmon home. That's been our kind of battle cry for 20 years in the Klamath. These fish belong here. They belong in these reaches above the dams. It's where they're from. And I think it's been a good way for us to engage people by just starting with that notion that we bring these fish home to where they belong. I do want to talk a little about who I work for. I work for Karuk. Karuk is the second biggest tribe in California. They're that red line kind of denotes Karuk's Aboriginal territory in the Middle Klamath, and downstream, denoted in the yellow line, is the neighboring tribe, the Yurok. What's not here, the Hoopa Valley tribe is over here on the Trinity, and up here in the Upper Basin, you have the Klamath tribes of Oregon, being the biggest tribe in Oregon. And then sort of scattered around the basin, there's several small rancherias and several unrecognized tribes in the area. But the Klamath River is Indian country. There are very few places in America, particularly in the lower 48, where you have large tribes. And I, as a non-Indian person, I describe it as the tribes here are culturally intact. And I say that because these tribes live in the same place that their ancestors have lived literally for 10 millennia, right? So they weren't this, the United States was not successful in moving them off of their Aboriginal lands. They live in the same place they've been for thousands and thousands of years. And I think that's really relevant here. The Klamath is, it's really remarkable just from the biological diversity. And I don't really have a slide, but it starts with the geology of the basin. The upper basin is it's high desert up there. It's really a volcanically driven system. As you come downstream, the Klamath ends in temperate rainforest with some of the tallest trees on Earth. So the Klamath is really a diverse place, and that is one reason why the biological diversity is so great. So we have multiple runs of salmon, multiple runs of steelhead, multiple runs of lamprey in the Klamath, several different species of mussels, several different species of suckers, some of which are endemic to the Klamath. You've got 12-foot long, 100-year-old green sturgeons. The Klamath kind of has it all. Unfortunately, it's not as diverse as it used to be. So pink salmon, chum salmon, and candlefish have already been extirpated from the Klamath. And we know that spring Chinook, coho, and summer steelhead, and the chawam are really hanging on by a thread. These fish are in really big trouble. And so we need to do something dramatic in order to keep these fish from going extinct. As I move into talking more about dam removal, I just want to point out that the dams, the Klamath Basin is shaped like an hourglass, and the dams are at that skinny part of the hourglass. And so it really means about half the basin is just off limits to these fish. And I think the implications of that are pretty obvious. If you take away half the habitat, half the spawning and rearing areas, it's obviously going to have catastrophic consequences for fish populations. The Karuk and the other tribes in the basin, as I mentioned earlier, are culturally intact. That means Karuk dip net fishing today looks a lot like Karuk dip net fishing has for millennia. This is true about language and ceremonies, their basketry, and other cultural practices. But what kind of came with colonization is sort of this new cultural diversity. So it's gold miners, irrigated farming, commercial fisheries, logging. What I don't have up here is pot cultivation, a big issue. And it's really all of this, you know, economic diversity and different interests in the basin has really led to a crisis where the Klamath River has really been asked to do too much. And what that looks like are massive fish kills. This is the 20th anniversary of the Klamath River fish kill of 2002. Tens of thousands of adult salmon died before spawning. The crisis literally happened on California Native American Day, just as ceremonies were getting going. It was a very it was I can't overstate how what a catastrophe this event was for Native people in the Klamath. And then every year we get these massive blooms of toxic blue green algae. This is Iron Gate Reservoir. It's it's really dramatic. I mean, the reservoirs turn the color of antifreeze, and it is a species of algae called Macrocystis aeruginosa. It's a potent liver toxin. This is what the river looks like flowing into Copco Lake. You can see the water quality in the river significantly better than the water quality in the reservoir just from the blooms of these toxic algae. Uh, there's a lot of obvious ecological consequences of these massive algae blooms, but it also means there's signs up that say don't touch the water several months every year. So that's true around the reservoirs every year. And in a lot of years, the conditions are such that the blooms are carried downstream. And we've had years where toxic algae, the threshold of the toxin was so high all the way down the river that there were signs at the mouth of the river 200 miles away warning people not to touch the water. And this happens in late summer, mid and late summer. And that's just when fishing is getting going, ceremonies are getting going. And so this is one of the things that dam removal will alleviate are these massive blooms of toxic algae. The Klamath is a very complicated place politically. Most of the basin is in federal ownerships. Most of the basin is BLM and U.S. Forest Service still. Uh, but there's this, giant alphabet soup of players in the Klamath. So there's 2 states, there's 8 counties. You have to deal with NOAA Fisheries and Department of Commerce. You have to deal with the U.S. Forest Service and Department of Agriculture. And then from the Department of Interior, you've got the Bureau of Reclamation and their irrigation project in the Upper Basin, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And then you've got the hydroelectric reach. These are privately owned dams. They're owned by a company called PacifiCorp. And I'll go into a little more detail about PacifiCorp and the dam ownership later. So where are we at? So today, salmon runs are really less than 10% of the historic average, if not lower than that. We've got fish that have been extirpated. We've got fish that are ESA listed. But with that comes different kinds of impacts. So the impacts to tribal culture. So the spring salmon ceremony is a big deal for Karuk. If you think back in the day, if it's been a long winter, you're probably running out of whatever you smoked and put by for the winter. The first tasty thing to come up the river is spring Chinook salmon. So there's a whole ceremony around the appearance of spring Chinook. If there's no spring Chinook in the river, it's really hard to have those ceremonies. So there's this intimate interconnection between the fisheries and the Klamath River, the water quality in the Klamath River, and culture and religion and spirituality for the tribes. This also has I think the first time in a dam relicensing we brought these issues up. The declined or denied access to traditional food has had an enormous impact on the health of Native people. So if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. People lived here for 10,000 years and their bodies were adapted to eating acorn, salmon, mushrooms, deer, elk, all those things that tribes subsisted on all that time. And when you take that away and replace it with a Western diet in a generation's time, it has consequences. And so what we find is that heart disease, diet-related obesity, diabetes is much higher among tribal members than non-Indians living in the same community. And this is something you see the world over in Native people that are really forced to eat a Western diet. And it's had big consequences to the economy of this region. People used to come from all over the world to fish the Klamath because of the abundant fisheries, and it's really been lost. And for these rural communities to think that every fish caught by a recreational angler is worth $200 to the local economy, and this is an old number. It's 25% or 30% more than that today, I'm sure. But it's a big deal for these rural communities to have ecotourism as an economic opportunity. So you put all these problems together and blend them, and we talk about a rotating crisis on the Klamath. So we have fish kills, then this leads to regulatory restrictions for irrigated agriculture. So then you have farmers protesting because they're denied access to water. You have commercial salmon fishermen in the ocean, their seasons being cut short because of lack of Klamath fish. Um, and so it's sort of like every year, one or more parties suffer from the Klamath crisis. And the causes of the crisis are, of course, complicated and manifold. We're going to focus on the dams, but I will just say that the way we've managed our forest, especially early on, the way commercial fishing and canneries were operated in the Klamath had a big impact. The legacy of gold mining, and of course, irrigated agriculture. I mean, this is the Scott River. Looks like an ATV trail. Um, I'm going to focus on dams for a lot of reasons. One, it's probably the single biggest thing we can do to reverse all these negative trends. But dams are licensed, privately owned dams are licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they have a license that expires, and it's usually every 30 to 50 years. So it's really a once in a lifetime chance to work through a license on a dam. And that's the opportunity that came up on the Klamath starting back in 2004 was the expiration of a license. This is what the four dams look like. Iron Gate Dam is the monster at the bottom of the system. It's a big earth and rock structure. Um, Copco Dam is actually taller than Iron Gate, but a smaller structure. And then there's J.C. Boyle and Copco too. So the plan is we're going to remove all four of these dams. And so that's one of the things that's really unprecedented about what we're doing here is the simultaneous removal of several structures at once. And I always like to talk about what the dams do. I think it's easy for a lot of us who are river people to kind of get it. Denied access to spawning habitat for migrating fish, the water quality stuff we talked about. The dams create optimal conditions for fish diseases to run rampant in the reaches below the dams. But we get to remove dams because of what they don't do. And I say that because driving fish extinct and creating justice issues for tribes, unfortunately, is not always enough to do the right thing. But these dams are classic deadbeat dams. They do not make a lot of electricity, therefore they don't make a lot of money. In fact, getting a new license would cost the company more than the arrangement we have to remove them. These dams provide no drinking or irrigation water, and they provide virtually no flood control. So these dams, a prime candidate for dam removal, they're deadbeat structures. The company doesn't even want them, and it's still taking us 20 years to get to this point. And we can have a conversation about why that is at the end if folks want to. Um, we know the history of dam removal in this country is rooted in a settlement. In other words, the federal agency FERC has never just straight up ordered a dam removal successfully. And so what FERC prefers is a negotiated settlement of some sort. But PacifiCorp early on didn't even want to talk to us. In fact, PacifiCorp's original plan was to get a new license. And they knew if they could avoid requirements for fish ladders and avoid having to mitigate the water quality, they could probably make it economically work for themselves. So we had to beat PacifiCorp to the negotiating table, and we had to generate the kind of interest in this that led to both Republican and Democratic administrations forcing some regulatory actions on PacifiCorp and the dams. So if you go to bringthesalmonhome.org, there's a great story map that tells this whole story. But we started, when we first started, PacifiCorp was owned by a Scottish multinational energy company called Scottish Power. We kicked off our dam removal campaign by loading about 30 of us up and going to Scotland and crashing the shareholders meeting in Edinburgh. We did that 3 times. They sold PacifiCorp to Berkshire Energy, which of course is a company owned by Warren Buffett. We then started going to Omaha, Nebraska. We crashed the shareholders meeting of Buffett 3 times. We crashed cocktail parties among shareholders. We dumped toxic algae in the lobby of their offices. We did banner hangs over highways. We bought ads on buses. We bought this ad to run on the buses that circumnavigate their headquarters in Portland. We did direct mail pieces to ratepayers. We did everything that you can think of in the activist toolkit. We did. And you put all that together, and it's a pretty awesome story. But I just want to say it's called Suits and Signs Consulting for a reason, because it takes more than the signs to get it done. So one of the great pleasures of working with tribes is here in the Klamath, the best scientists in the basin work for tribes. So we were populating the FERC record with the kind of data and information and studies necessary to make the case for dam removal. And it's the kind of stuff that's court durable, right? If it came down to a showdown in a courtroom, we can win there, and we have won there. It also takes the attorneys. So you pile on top of the grassroots action, the good science. You got to have good legal counsel. So I always say it takes suit signs and scientists to win big campaigns. I do highlight the dam removal is only part of the problem, though. So above the dams, upstream of the dams, there's a 225,000 acre irrigation project that sucks water out of the Klamath. This is really determines flow in the Klamath River, how this irrigation project works. So we actually tried to craft something that was bigger than dam removal. We tried to craft a dam removal settlement, but also negotiate a water settlement with irrigators in the upper basin. And so this all came together in 2010. And sure enough, Arnold Schwarzenegger said, it's time to say hasta la vista to the Klamath Dams. It was a pretty magic moment for my career, I guess. But the whole package crafted this way required an act of Congress. And therein lied the problem. What happened in 2010 was the Tea Party conservatives got a toehold in the Congress, and Congress failed to act. And a lot of that was that conservatives didn't want to do anything that touched on dam removal. So it looked like everything was going to collapse when at the end of the Obama presidency, we salvaged the dam removal piece from the whole package. We don't need an act of Congress to remove dams. FERC can approve dam removal. So in February of 16, we repackaged dam removal as a standalone deal. And that's what we've been working on since. So we don't need an act of Congress. We don't need any federal dollars. We negotiated an arrangement where PacifiCorp chips in about half the cost of removing the dams. California's chipping in the other half. At this point, it's a total of about $500 million. And there's a very complicated insurance package that goes with this. So one of the things for PacifiCorp was, if you want to pull off the biggest dam removal in the history of the world, we don't want the liability for whatever might go wrong to be on us. So we have a liability package that was a big challenge to put together to make this whole deal work. And there's one reason why it's taken so long. We felt like everything was good to go a couple of years in 2020, but FERC said, look, PacifiCorp has to be involved to the very end. PacifiCorp can't just hand the dams off to this newly created dam removal entity. So we created the Klamath River Renewal Corporation to receive the dams and oversee the removal. And when we got that news from FERC, PacifiCorp, I think, tried to use this as an excuse to back out of the deal. And this is where I thought a lot of magic happened. You know, we had not really done any grassroots organizing for a few years, and it's really hard to turn on grassroots energy. You know, it takes years of organizing to kind of build grassroots momentum. But it was just sort of magic to me how overnight people all over the place started started the grassroots engine again and started holding Warren Buffett accountable again. And in fact, these are young Native folks in Omaha, Nebraska, in front of Warren Buffett's office buildings. People are dropping banners on top of the Lloyd Center, where PacifiCorp's headquarters are in Portland. And this is probably my favorite banner from that movement. And then when PacifiCorp's executives actually came out here, angry tribal members really were confrontational. So they were on a tribal council had taken these executives on a tour of the river, and tribal members blockaded the river and forced them to smell the toxic algae that they brought down from the reservoirs for them to take a look at. I think you put all that together, and I think PacifiCorp, any idea that they would weasel out of the deal was soon extinguished. And soon thereafter, we had the governors of Oregon and California, Berkshire Hathaway executive officers and tribal chairmen announcing that we will move forward with dam removal. And we finally got sort of this money quote from Warren Buffett, demonstrating that he finally understands that this is a need to work with tribal people, and it's part of it's an environmental justice issue for Native people. And that led to where we are now. So just last week, the draft EIS came out. All the plans have been filed with FERC. We expect this calendar year to get a final approval for surrender activities to begin, and we'll start removing dams. That means we will start drawing down the reservoirs next year, and we would see Iron Gate Dam actually removed in January or February of 2024. So I'm going to stop there. That was a whole lot of every time I tell the story, time's passed and there's more to tell. But I'm happy to go into detail about any of that. I encourage you guys to check out bringthesalmonhome.org. There's a really cool story map that goes into a lot of detail about all the antics and the direct actions and the protests. Reconnect Klamath is a really good spot to find out a lot of information about dam removal. You can check me out at Suits and Signs, and you can catch me on Twitter or just pop me an email, and I'd love to tell you more about Klamath dam removal. So I will stop. How will I do that? I'll stop here. I think I have to escape, and then I have to stop sharing. How's that? I get an A for my technology skills, and I'll turn it back over to Becca and Angie.
So if anyone has any questions for Craig, you can put them in the chat, or we can, there's a way to raise your hand and we can call on you and unmute you. But we've got about half an hour for questions and discussion. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Hi, Craig. My name is Dan Shelby. I work for Confluence Research and Consulting, and we're involved with the Klamath Dam removal and some of the recreation planning aspects. Confluence did the flow study for the relicensing project back in the 90s, and we concluded another flow study on the Klamath just the summer before last. And so I'm also in a PhD program right now studying a few different topics related to dam removal. And one of those projects is all about the liability and how the liability transfer evolved. And so I'm just I'm wondering if you have any comments as somebody who's involved with the process about um, how the liability transfer scheme evolved, and how they decided on that joint license transfer between the states and KRRC, and then also how you think that will what that will mean for any future dam removal projects.
So so some of this I'll just tell you right now is above my pay grade. There was an army of top shelf attorneys trying to figure this out, but I will say we clean up nuclear waste, we blow up skyscrapers in the middle of downtown. Like, we do risky, weird stuff all the time, and people get insurance for it. So it's not completely crazy or unprecedented to figure out an insurance and liability package for something like this. And I really think that for a while the company kind of hid behind, well, if you ever figure out how to insure something crazy like this, we'll go along. And I think it took us a while to figure out what kind of insurance companies and what kind of law firms to get involved to figure that out. So I'll say that. The other thing I'll say is, the original plan, and it was always a key principle for PacifiCorp, and I give them credit. PacifiCorp always led with, we're willing to give the dam, if you guys want to remove the dams, we'll give them to you and you can remove them, but we're not going to have anything to do with it. And so we worked to meet that demand. And so we created the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. We came up with the money, and they essentially bought insurance. It's more complicated than that, but for me, it's like they bought insurance. FERC didn't like that. And FERC's like, well, wait a minute. You're about to pull out the biggest dam rule in the history of the world. You created a nonprofit out of thin air who has no experience in this sort of thing. We're not sure that works. We want, in case something weird happens, we want an experienced player. So we need PacifiCorp to stay involved. PacifiCorp rejected that, but I will say I give a lot of credit to Gavin Newsom and Governor Kate Brown. Oregon and California really stepped up. They convinced Berkshire Hathaway that the states and the company could share that responsibility. And California in particular has a whole bunch of FERC licenses already. So California was a known quantity to FERC and all that. So that's kind of how it got put back together. You could go to a day-long seminar on the details of how that insurance package worked, but I'd have someone else give that talk. It's voodoo to me in some ways, but it's a complicated. But it's, like I say, we clean up nuclear waste and demolish skyscrapers, and so these large companies that do those kinds of projects have mechanisms for insuring them.
Thanks, Craig. And yeah, I do think it's interesting how you mentioned nuclear plants. That's one of the things I've been looking at is nuclear plants. They have to maintain a decommissioning fund from the very beginning of their project, and basically they're totally responsible for funding and for any liabilities involved in the project, and they can only transfer the license once they've totally completed the decommissioning. So I'll make sure to get your contact information. I'd like to talk to you a little more if you're okay with that.
Sure. Yeah. Call me anytime.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
See, my good friend and colleague and rafting pal, Jen Rice. How do you apply what we learned on Klamath to the eel? So I don't, for you guys, the next watershed, big watershed south of me is the Eel River. It's also a famous salmon stream. It's pretty big river system. It has a complex of aging dams owned by PG&E. PG&E doesn't want them. PG&E has already figured out that getting rid of deadbeat dams is the way to go. But it's complicated. These dams also move water from the Eel to the Russian. And of course, once a community starts getting free water from something like that, they get quickly addicted to it and want to keep it. I will say there's a lot of us who worked on Klamath that I've gotten really interested in working on eel. And it's like, man, I wish I'd known 20 years ago what I know now when I started on Klamath. So I think I'm bringing some stuff to the table, what stuff that did and didn't work, and to the eel. And some of this is how we talk about dam removal in our communications work. Um, just like the Klamath, the eel involves multiple tribes and irrigation districts, and how you broker those conversations. I think I've learned a lot about, and I know a heck of a lot more about how FERC works today than I did. But the big one is like understanding how energy companies make their money. So I used to think if we can just run up the bill on PacifiCorp, it'll get too expensive. They'll cry uncle, and that's not how it works. The energy industry is regulated such that you don't make up any money by generating electricity. You don't make any money by pumping electricity to people's houses. All that ratepayers pay cost for that back to the company. Where companies make money is on capital improvement projects. So anything you do to build a new project, build more infrastructure, relicense old infrastructure, or remove old infrastructure is a capital improvement. Ratepayers have to pay you that plus a rate of return of something like 12 or 13%. So everything we were doing to run up the cost of dam relicensing for PacifiCorp was really good for them. And so what we figured out is the public utility commissions get to decide what is rate recoverable and what's not, and get to make public interest determinations. And so you have to kind of get involved in the public utility commission process to threaten that some of these costs will not be recovered from ratepayers and may be recovered from investors. And if they start thinking the investors have to pay for it, everyone changes their tune pretty quickly. So I think a lot of it for me was just really having a nerd out on how regulated energy industry works, and being kind of grossed out that it works the way it does.
Hey, Craig, there's a question from Nina. Many thanks for the presentation. Do you know how Klamath Lake levels and all of the suckers will be affected by the removal of the upper dams?
So there are two species of sucker endemic to the Klamath in Upper Klamath Lake and the other lakes up there, these are natural lakes, which are actually a lot smaller than they used to be. They're called it's Lost River and short nosed sucker, or in the Klamath language, the Chwam and Koptu. These fish are very different than salmon. Salmon's scheme is fecundity, right? We're going to have a lot of babies and some of them will make it. Well, the scheme for suckers is we're going to live a long time and have lots of babies over time. Fewer babies, but many, many years of having babies. These fish live to be 30, 40, 50 years old. They have not successfully reproduced in something like 30 years. So every one of those suckers is like 30 years old. And so there's something wrong up there, um, between when those fish hatch as juveniles and get recruited in adulthood, they're not making it. The dam removal that we propose really doesn't touch on that. These dams are downstream of those lakes, but it kind of plays into it. So it has to do with the water balancing, and it has to do, and these are things that in our bigger package I described earlier, it's the restoration of wetlands in the upper basin. So the upper basin drained this massive volcanic basin that was nutrient rich. There's this Everglades-like wetland up there that consumed those nutrients. Then the water came downstream. They took out all the wetlands to grow potatoes, alfalfa, cows, strawberries. And so now that water is hyper-eutrophic, super nutrient rich, comes downriver that way. I would say that's the next problem. Like if we can remove the dams, the next big problem to tackle is going to be these water quality issues in the upper basin, and hope to do it in time to prevent Chwam and Lost River sucker from going extinct.
Okay, Danielle's asking, the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe has a sacred sucker that has been affected by dams in the Truckee. They might have some insights on the fishery management.
I'll make a note of that. I do know that the Klamath tribes have a sucker hatchery, and in this infrastructure bill, there's additional funding for expanding these hatchery operations up there. Um, but I think people are really, the chemistry of those lakes is a big challenge. And to be honest, I think people haven't quite figured out what to do. And the ideas range from a water treatment facility, like would be a municipal scale water treatment facility, massive restoration of native wetlands, versus or something like the engineered wetlands, like we have in Arcata. Like our wastewater in Arcata is treated through an engineered wetland. So there's a lot of ideas of how to get to it, but I tell you, people are working really hard to figure this out, and sucker biologists from all over the country are contributing to the discussion.
I have a nuts and bolts question about the dam removals themselves, and maybe I should have read this somewhere, but how are they planning like the sequence? And I'll come down
Yeah,
at once.
so there will be admittedly short-term negative impacts associated with dam removal, right? So there's a there's a lot of sediment trapped behind the dams. Not as much as you might think, like a tenth of what was behind Elwha in the Klamath. Um, and so, how do you mitigate that? Well, the big thing is let's just have one release of sediment, not four. So the dam removal is we're really going to remove them simultaneously. I think the little Copco dam they'll take out first, but the three big dams will be removed simultaneously. And so the idea is you have that one sediment plume down the river. You suffer those negative consequences one time, and the timing of it. So we would like to get started removing dams as soon as possible, but we can only do it in the dead of winter because that's the time of year where there's the least amount of action going on in the main stem. So juvenile fish, by and large, are in the tributaries, and adults are not migrating in the river. So January, February, March is the time frame for removing the dams, releasing the sediment plume, and all that was done to minimize the adverse consequences of dam removal.
And then sort of related, Joan asked, what happens between now and the dam removal?
Well, we have to get through the NEPA process. We have a draft EIS. Everyone should go to, or everyone may like to go to, bringthesalmonhome.org, hit the action button, comment at FERC saying, yes, this draft EIS captures it well, go forth and remove dams. We will get, by the end of the year, a final EIS followed by the FERC order. As soon as we get a FERC order, everybody launch into motion. We actually have to build roads to some of the work sites. We have to ready areas for the spoils from Iron Gate Dam to be put back in the ground. We have to replumb Wairika's drinking water diversion. And then we have to draw down the reservoirs as far as we can, and then remove the dams. So there's actually a lot to it. It's a massive undertaking, construction operation. The lead dam removal entity is Kiewit International. They're the kind of outfit that builds skyscrapers and bridges and stuff like that. And then the other big um, consultants or contractors called RES. They're an outfit out of Houston, and they come in after the removal and do the restoration. So you're going to jump on this project, remove the dams, and then they've already collected native seeds from the area. So they want to mobilize that sediment in place. We don't want it to become all Himalayan blackberries and thistles, so we're going to go in and put native plants back in place. So there's like two big consulting teams, one removing and one restoring as we remove the dams.
Craig, John McLaughlin asked in the chat regarding revegetation of reservoir beds, are the plans and resources adequate?
Yeah, so I would say yes. That was a key part of the whole planning effort from the beginning. Like we don't want to, because if you don't go in behind it and jump on top of it, it'll be a little bit of a disaster, right? It will be invasive plant world up there. So we do want to go in there, grade everything appropriately, put back native plants appropriately, and we think there's probably going to be a lot of opportunities for real restoration projects, putting woody debris at the mouths of creeks and things like that for fish. So that's a big part of it. And tribal businesses and tribes are actually contracting doing some of that work, which is also exciting. And I see Jen's follow up about uh, Klamath boating. So this has actually been a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of a controversy. So there are commercial outfitters that I don't know if you guys have ever run Hell's Corner, but Hell's Corner is just downstream of J.C. Boyle Dam, and the run is made possible in the summertime by dam releases. So they generate hydropower, throw 1,000 or 2,000 CFS into the river. You go boat Hell's Corner. It's one of the best class 4-ish commercial runs available in the area in the summertime. So there's going to be dam removal is going to change how outfitters approach that run. It's probably going to change the timing for when it's available, but it's also going to create whole new reaches of river to raft. So I think I saw folks from American Whitewater might be able to talk about this a little bit more, but I do know we anticipate there's being some pretty good whitewater reaches beneath Copco Reservoir. And I'm going to tell you, y'all will have to knife fight me to be the first one down when we remove those dams. I'm going to be there. I think there's going to be more opportunities for recreation, certainly more opportunities for recreational fishing. But I do think it's just going to change how we boat, when we boat, where we boat. Uh, but I think it's all for the better, right? It's like every time I run the T or run some river that's a big, or the American River, I always feel a little guilty about the only reason I'm out there is because there's some dam upstream that turns on at 9 o'clock and I got to have my boat rigged at 9 o'clock. It's like, I want to boat on natural rivers that are living, healthy, vibrant, and support the communities that they're in. And so that's where we're getting on the Klamath. And I think it'll be some changes for us who boat that river, but I think it's all good. I think it's all going to be for the better.
And I would really like to add too that there are some really big wins for recreation in this latest version of the EIS. So the latest version includes removal of in-channel vegetation in Ward's Canyon as a condition of restoration, and also addressing the access sites on the reservoir reaches.
Well, this will be a segue and a little bit of an advertisement for a future roundtable like this. I know Jen's going to have a talk about sort of the cultural competency and boat, like for me as a non-Indian person boating in tribal places, that reach that's going to be uncovered and become boatable is full of tribal sites. So the tribe there, the Shasta tribe, was the inhabitants of that place. They're not fairly recognized, but there are some Shasta groups around. They have keen concern about people getting in there and stealing artifacts, desecrating burial sites, village sites, and things like that. So I think one of the things we want to do is make sure, like, how do we mitigate that? And I think some of it's just simply education. Like, we got to hold our fellow boaters accountable. Don't be a dick. Don't go boating in a place like this and pick up, whether it's artifacts, human remains are in there. Like, I think we got to learn how to be respectful in these spaces, or we won't be able to. I'm telling you, tribes will kick you out of these spaces if we're not. But I think that's something we really need to educate ourselves, and we need to educate our whole community about, is how to be in these places in a way that doesn't create more conflict.
I also think having appropriately placed and appropriately developed access sites is a really big part of that. So that you
Yes.
have people getting on and off the river in places where, in the places where they want to, so they're
Yeah.
not going off and trying to make their own access points to, put in just above this one rapid that they want to.
Well, it's a challenge because where's the best place to build access is a flat spot. Turns out that's the best place to put your village if you're a tribe. So in a place like this where there's so much topography, um, the conflicts are just natural and happen. So those are things we're trying to sift through. We did get a lot of pushback from the recreational boating community, and I think the response to that is, okay, we need to beef up the recreation plan. We do need to figure out how to pay for and how. I'm like, I'm gonna be really mad if we get through all this and I can't back my raft up to the river on a trailer. It's like I don't know what's wrong with California and no boat ramps, but here's a chance to actually have a boat ramp somewhere that's usable. So, so I think all that's going to be possible, but it's not a simple, stupid thing. It's like it's really challenging to work through these cultural issues.
And we've been trying to get them to think about not just putting an access at a convenient flat spot, but at a place that's in between, that's like right at the break between different difficulties of whitewater. So like right
Yeah,
on the break points in the slope, for example,
yeah,
so that like kayakers can, put in just above that first class 3, class 4 rapid they want to run. Drift boats can take out from the class 2 run right in that same spot. And so
yeah.
hopefully we can get them to think about it that way and not just, well, where can we plow a road through to the river most easily?
Yeah. And I know the crew from American Whitewater is really involved in helping make sure that the recreational community's concerns like that are being integrated into all this.
Hey, Craig. John has asked, LWD has been important in Elwha restoration. Are there plans to use it in the Klamath?
I'm not sure what LWD is.
I don't either.
Large woody debris.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Maybe
okay.
that's it. Uh, yeah, we have been doing projects. So it's kind of weird. Like as Dan, I think, pointed out, there's a few sections where people are scared of getting killed kayaking because of all the all the wood in the river, and there's going to be some neat desire to take that stuff out. And other places we are going to have to put wood back in. Um, so so yes, large woody debris is we're starting to see this in restoration projects all over the Klamath Basin and probably all over the Pacific Northwest, where we are building these complex wood structures, especially in rivers with an unnatural hydrograph that doesn't move, where woods doesn't move very well naturally. We're taking like they're taking downed old growth trees and like jamming them into rivers and anchoring them in there to build the structure that fish need to flourish. So yes, LWD, as the pros call it, is part of the restoration plan.
Any other questions?
I'll just end by saying Klamath dam removal does not fix every problem on the Klamath. So I would say Klamath dam removal is necessary, but by itself insufficient to fix this watershed. We are going to have to deal with the irrigation project upstream and how it uses water. Turns out the next 100 years will be drier than the last 100 years, so we have to change how we use water. The other is the water quality issues and the wetland issues. But third is going to be tributaries like the Scott, the Shasta, the Salmon River. We've got to fix those tributaries as well to really exploit the opportunity afforded by dam removal. So this is going to be a monumental leap forward in putting this basin back together, but it's not the end, it's the beginning. I'm going to
Well, oh,
shamelessly promote our website.
thanks so much, Craig. That was awesome and great to hear like the whole story. Um, I just want to highlight we've got some more river management roundtables coming up, as Craig was mentioning. Later this month, on the 22nd of March, we've got Jen Rice, who's joining us right now. She's going to be joining us, and we're going to be looking at fostering respect for Indigenous cultural river uses. And so, for example, on the Klamath, when the tribes are having ceremony and uh, ask rafters not to go by during that time, and different ways that we can just all work to get along on rivers. Is the short of it, but I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So I hope you all join us for that. And then also on April 12th, we're going to be looking at what does waterway management mean and why is it so complex? We've got all the information about these on our website, river-management.org. So you can go there to register, read a little bit more about the presenters and what's going on with all of these. I encourage you to do that. We've also got some other trainings coming up. We talked a little bit today about some like river access planning stuff. And so we've got a river access planning webinar coming up on March 15th. That's going to be looking at steps 3 and 4 from the River Access Planning Guide, which you can also find on the RMS website. And then on the 16th of March, we're doing a webinar on Introduction to Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. It's one of the more complicated parts of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So if you're unfamiliar, it's a nice intro. If you are familiar, it's a nice review. So I encourage you to go to the River Training Center page to learn a little bit more about those. And I'll put my email in the chat in case you have any questions. You can always reach out. And then, Becca, if you want to go back one slide, as a reminder, we did record today's session. So if you'd like to go back and look at any part of it, you'll be able to find that on our video channel in about 24 hours or so. And you can also find a bunch of our other recordings from previous trainings and river management roundtables as well. And then, Lisa, I don't know if you want to mention more about what's in your chat.
Sure. We are going to have a Pacific chapter trip on the Klamath River, and we're still putting the program together, but it'll be meet up on Friday evening and float on Saturday, and maybe float upstream on Sunday, camping at the Curly Jack campground. and so what we're hoping to do is to assemble, it'll be an awesome river trip, of course, but we'll hopefully assemble locals, folks who can talk about what's going on with the dam removal from agency perspective, if possible, from the tribe's perspective, if possible, and from the folks who are working as, the river advocacy folks. We're going to, of course, invite the AW folks because they've been so involved, and others. So look for notices coming up. Once we get registration, we'll holler. And it'll be exciting and just incredibly timely. And I wanted to thank Craig for sharing an hour with us and for all the work that you've done for 20 years. I know AW started getting involved around 20 years ago. So I know that a lot of people have worked for a long time on this. And we look forward, Jen, to your talk. It's on the 22nd. So look forward to talking about the other side, the people side of what might be happening and what's kind of brewing. So thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Craig. Good meeting you.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Thanks, everyone.